Good evening. Welcome to part 10 of our Middle-earth-inspired series. This is the fifth and last story in the Elven Sanctuaries, the last light of the Elves. Let's begin. The forest seemed to breathe with an ancient rhythm, its towering trees swaying gently as if bowing to an unseen force. Orlen felt the warmth of the ring pulse steadily in his pocket, its rhythm matching the faint hum that resonated through the ground beneath his boots. The path had grown narrower, flanked by moss-covered stones and twisted roots that jutted out like fingers reaching for the sky. Cyrana walked ahead, her blade sheathed but her hand never straying far from its hilt. Adric followed close behind, his staff glowing faintly in the dim light that filtered through the dense canopy. Calen lingered at the rear, his steps cautious, his gaze darting to the shifting shadows at the edge of the path. The air carried the faint scent of blooming flowers and damp earth, a reminder of the magic that lingered in these woods. "This is the last sanctuary," Cyrana said, her voice quiet but resolute. "The sage said it would hold the answers we need." The group moved in silence, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves and moss. The path began to widen, and ahead, the forest opened into a glade bathed in soft, golden light. At its center stood a structure unlike any they had seen. A vast dome of living wood and crystal, its walls shimmering with the light of 1,000 stars. The sanctuary seemed to grow organically from the earth, its roots entwined with the soil, its branches stretching skyward as though drawing power from the heavens. Orlen felt a wave of awe wash over him as they approached, the warmth of the ring intensifying with each step. "It's beautiful," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Adric nodded, his gaze fixed on the sanctuary. "This place is alive," he said, "every part of it. The magic here is ancient, older even than the sage." As they reached the sanctuary's entrance, the air grew warmer, and the faint hum that had followed them through the forest swelled into a harmonious melody. The doors, carved from a single piece of luminous crystal, swung open with a soft, resonant sound, revealing a chamber bathed in light. The walls were lined with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and flow like water, depicting scenes of battles, celebrations, and gatherings of elves and figures shrouded in mystery. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, upon which rested a single artifact, a staff of dark wood crowned with a glowing crystal that pulsed faintly, its light casting long shadows across the room. Cyrana stepped forward cautiously, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. "What is it?" Orlen asked, his gaze fixed on the artifact. Adric moved closer, his expression one of awe and apprehension. "A keeper's staff," he said, his voice reverent. "It's said that the last of the keepers left their staffs in the sanctuaries, binding their power to these places to preserve their wisdom and their warnings." Calen hesitated at the threshold, his eyes darting to the carvings on the walls. "Then this is it," he said quietly. "The final sanctuary, the last light of the Elves." The air grew heavier as the group stepped into the chamber, the melody around them shifting into a deeper, resonant tone. Orlen felt the warmth of the ring spread through his chest, a strange sensation that filled him with equal parts hope and dread. As he approached the pedestal, the crystal atop the staff flared brightly, its light filling the chamber and illuminating the carvings in vivid detail. Scenes of the keepers rise and fall played out before them, elves crafting the relics in secret, their light shining against a backdrop of shadowy figures that seemed to stretch endlessly across the horizon. The scenes shifted, showing the keepers scattering the relics to distant corners of Middle-earth, their faces solemn as the shadows closed in around them. The light dimmed and the melody faded into silence as the crystal's glow softened once more. Cyrana reached for the staff, her hand hovering above it as though afraid to disturb its stillness. "What does it mean?" Orlen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Adric turned to him, his expression grave. "The keepers knew they couldn't hold the shadows at bay forever," he said. "They left their relics as a beacon for those who would come after them, a way to unite their strength and face what they could not." The room grew colder, and the light of the staff flickered briefly. Orlen felt a chill run down his spine as the carvings on the walls began to shift again, this time forming a single, towering figure cloaked in shadow. Its presence was overwhelming, and the air seemed to tremble with its weight. "The shadows," Calen whispered, his voice trembling. "They're still coming." Cyrana's hand closed around the staff, and the light flared brightly once more, driving the shadows back and filling the chamber with warmth. The melody returned, stronger and more harmonious than before, and Orlen felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. "Then we take the staff," Cyrana said firmly, "and we prepare for what's ahead." The chamber pulsed with life as the staff's light filled the space, its glow shifting from a soft gold to a deeper, more resonant blue. Cyrana gripped the artifact firmly, her posture rigid as though the weight of the staff extended far beyond its physical form. The runes along its length shimmered faintly, their patterns flowing like liquid starlight, and the carvings on the walls seemed to respond, their scenes flickering and shifting with new intensity. Orlen watched in awe as the room transformed before his eyes, the light revealing hidden details within the carvings. Figures stepping out of shadow, their forms blurred but unmistakably elven, holding the relics high as they faced a churning sea of darkness. "The keepers," Adric murmured, his staff glowing faintly as though resonating with the artifact. "This place isn't just a sanctuary. It's a record, a message they left behind." The air grew colder, the melody in the chamber deepening into a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the very stone beneath their feet. Orlen felt the pulse of the ring in his pocket grow erratic, its warmth intensifying as the staff's light flared brighter. He stepped closer to Cyrana, his voice unsteady. "What's happening?" he asked, his gaze darting between the glowing staff and the shifting carvings. Cyrana didn't respond immediately, her attention fixed on the artifact as though listening to something only she could hear. When she spoke, her voice was low but steady. "It's showing us what we need to see," she said. "The answers we came for." As the group stood in silence, the walls of the chamber seemed to dissolve, replaced by a vast, swirling void filled with stars and shadows. They were no longer standing in the sanctuary, but in a space that felt infinite and otherworldly. The light of the staff extended outward, forming a glowing pathway that stretched into the distance, its edges blurred and indistinct. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, their forms tall and regal, their faces ageless and solemn. They carried relics of all shapes and sizes, rings, staffs, amulets, each one glowing with a unique light that pushed back the encroaching darkness. One of the figures stepped forward, their presence commanding yet serene. They spoke, their voice echoing in a language that Orlen couldn't understand but somehow felt he knew. Adric's eyes widened, his staff trembling in his grip. "They're speaking of the sanctuaries," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Each one holds a fragment of the truth, scattered across Middle-earth to protect it from the shadows. Together they form the whole the key to restoring balance. The figure raised their relic high, its light intensifying, and the void shifted again, revealing a towering structure at the center of the vision. It was a spire of blinding light and impenetrable shadow, its form shifting and writhing as though alive. "The source," Cyrana said, her voice sharp with realization. "That's where the relics are leading us. That's what the keepers were trying to protect." The figure's gaze turned toward the group, their eyes locking with Orlen's. The warmth of the ring in his pocket surged, and he felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Fear, hope, determination, all blending into a single, overwhelming certainty. "But they couldn't reach it," Adric said quietly, his expression heavy. "The shadows overtook them before they could complete their task." The vision began to fade, the void collapsing in on itself as the group was returned to the sanctuary. The walls reappeared around them, the carvings glowing faintly as the staff's light dimmed to a soft, steady glow. Cyrana lowered the staff, her hand trembling slightly as she turned to face the others. "We know where we're going," she said firmly. "But the path won't be easy." Adric nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The Enchanted Forests," he said. "That's where the next sanctuary lies. It's the last step before we face the spire." Calen shifted uneasily, his gaze lingering on the carvings. "And the shadows?" he asked, his voice quiet. "They'll follow us, won't they?" Cyrana's grip on the staff tightened, her expression hardening. "Let them," she said. "We've made it this far. We'll make it further." Orlen felt the weight of her words settle over him, the warmth of the ring a constant reminder of the responsibility they all carried. He stepped forward, his voice steady. "Then we move forward," he said. "Together." The group exchanged determined glances, their resolve unspoken but clear as they turned toward the sanctuary's exit. As they stepped back into the golden light of the glade, the air felt lighter as though the forest itself recognized their purpose. The path ahead was clear, the faint glow of the stones marking their way deeper into the elven lands. Orlen glanced back at the sanctuary one last time, its dome shimmering in the sunlight like a distant star. "The last light of the elves," he whispered, the words both a farewell and a promise. With the relics guiding their steps and the shadows looming behind them, the group set off toward the Enchanted Forests, their journey far from over, but their resolve stronger than ever. The golden light of the sanctuary's glade faded into the dense emerald canopy as the group moved further along the path, their steps steady but weighted with the revelations they carried. The forest around them grew quieter as though holding its breath, the hum of ancient magic receding into the soft rustle of leaves and the faint song of unseen birds. Orlen walked at the center of the group, the ring in his pocket pulsing gently, its warmth a constant presence as he mulled over the vision they had witnessed. The spire of light and shadow loomed in his mind, a beacon and a warning all at once. Cyrana held the keeper's staff firmly, its glow muted now but no less significant, the runes along its length shimmering faintly in rhythm with their steps. Adric trailed slightly behind, his staff glowing softly as he muttered to himself, his thoughts clearly occupied with the fragments of knowledge the sanctuary had revealed. Calen, quieter than usual, kept to the rear, his gaze darting to the shadows at the edge of the path, as though expecting the darkness to leap out and claim them at any moment. The path began to climb, the forest thinning slightly as the terrain grew rockier. The faint glow of the guiding stones flickered briefly, and the companions paused, their breaths misting in the cooler air. "The way forward feels uncertain," Adric said, his voice tinged with unease. "The stones are faltering. The magic here must be fading." Cyrana nodded, her expression unreadable as she scanned the path ahead. The sanctuaries weren't meant to last forever, she said. The keepers built them as a safeguard, but even their magic has limits. Her hand tightened on the staff, the glow of its crystal flaring briefly before dimming again. We're on our own from here. As the group pressed on, the atmosphere grew heavier, the light filtering through the trees dimming as clouds gathered above. The path narrowed again, its edges lined with jagged stones that jutted out like teeth. Orlen felt the warmth of the ring shift, its pulse quickening as though sensing something ahead. "Do you feel that?" he asked, his voice low. Cyrana stopped abruptly, her gaze narrowing as she held the staff higher, its light cutting through the growing shadows. "We're not alone," she said, her tone sharp. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the rustling of leaves replaced by an eerie silence. From the shadows ahead, a figure emerged, its form cloaked in tattered robes that billowed despite the still air. Its face was obscured, but its presence radiated a chilling malice that sent a shiver down Orlen's spine. The ring in his pocket grew hot, its pulse erratic, and he instinctively reached for it, his fingers closing around its smooth surface. "A shadow," Calen whispered, his voice trembling. The figure stepped closer, its movements deliberate and unhurried, as though it had all the time in the world. "You carry the light of the keepers," it said, its voice a rasping whisper that echoed unnaturally through the forest. "But light cannot escape shadow." Cyrana stepped forward, the staff's light flaring as she held it in front of her. "We've faced shadows before," she said firmly, "and we'll face you too." The figure paused, its head tilting slightly as though amused. "Bravery will not save you," it said. "The relics you bear are a beacon, but they are also a curse. They will draw us to you, no matter how far you run." The shadows around the figure writhed, twisting into tendrils that reached toward the group like living things. Orlen felt his chest tighten as the darkness pressed closer, but the ring in his hand grew warmer, its pulse steadying as though to counter the shadow's malice. Adric raised his staff, its light growing brighter as he stepped beside Cyrana. "We're not running," he said, his voice calm but resolute. The light from his staff joined the glow of the keeper's staff, the combined brilliance forcing the shadowed figure to recoil slightly. Orlen stepped forward then, the ring in his hand burning like a small sun. The warmth spread through him, filling him with a quiet strength he hadn't known he possessed. "The relics chose us for a reason," he said, his voice steady. "And we're not giving up on their purpose." The figure hissed, its form flickering like a dying flame. "Then you will fall," it snarled, its voice rising in pitch as the shadows surged forward. Cyrana thrust the staff into the ground, its light exploding outward in a wave that pushed the darkness back. The shadowed figure let out a guttural cream, its form unraveling as the light overwhelmed it. The forest grew brighter, the air clearing as the shadows dissolved into nothingness. Orlen exhaled slowly, his grip on the ring loosening as its warmth faded to a steady pulse. "Is it gone?" Calen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cyrana nodded, though her expression remained wary. "For now," she said. "But it's right. They'll keep coming." The group stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their journey pressing heavily upon them. Adric broke the stillness, his voice thoughtful. "The sanctuaries are behind us now," he said. "The Enchanted Forests lie ahead. Whatever truths the relics hold, we'll have to uncover them on our own." Orlen glanced at Cyrana, her grip on the staff firm, but her gaze distant. Then we keep moving, she said, her voice resolute. The sanctuaries gave us the light. It's up to us to carry it forward. As the group continued down the path, the forest began to change, its trees growing taller and wilder, their roots twisting into intricate patterns that wove together like threads of an ancient tapestry. The air grew warmer, and the faint sound of distant waterfalls carried through the trees, mingling with the soft hum of unseen life. Orlen felt the ring's pulse align with the rhythm of the forest, its warmth a quiet reminder of the light they carried. The Enchanted Forests awaited, their beauty and danger intertwined, and the companions moved forward with the knowledge that their journey was far from over, but their purpose clearer than ever.